The following program contains graphic descriptions of violence and may include disturbing content. Viewer discretion is advised. Tonight on Evil Exposed Killers, we uncover the terrifying story of Gary Ridgway, the infamous Green River Killer. For nearly 2 decades, Ridgway prowled the streets of Seattle and Tacoma, preying on vulnerable women, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. How did this seemingly ordinary man lead such a horrifying double life? Join us as we delve into the mind of one of America's most prolific serial killers and reveal the chilling truth behind his unspeakable crimes. Gary Ridgway, later known as the Green River Killer, was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. He grew up in a turbulent and emotionally unstable household. His father, a bus driver, was distant and passive, while his mother was domineering, aggressive, and overbearing. Ridgway's relationship with his mother was deeply troubled. He described feeling a confusing mixture of anger and sexual attraction toward her. She was known for humiliating and belittling Gary, even as she remained oddly affectionate, often bathing him until an inappropriate age. This dynamic left Ridgway with suppressed rage and a disturbing association between domination, humiliation, and sexuality. As a teenager, Ridgway struggled academically and socially. He was awkward and reserved, with few friends. His troubles in school led to behavioral issues, and it wasn't long before his inner darkness started to reveal itself. At the age of 16, Ridgway lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed him. Remarkably, the boy survived, and Ridgway later claimed that he attacked the child out of curiosity to see what it felt like to kill someone. This was a chilling early glimpse into the violent impulses that would later define Ridgway's life. After high school, Ridgway joined the Navy and was stationed in Vietnam. While deployed overseas, he engaged with sex workers frequently and contracted multiple sexually transmitted infections. His disdain for sex workers deepened during this time, though he continued to visit them throughout his life. Upon returning to the U.S., Ridgway married and settled in the Seattle-Tacoma area, working as a truck painter. He held the same job for over 30 years, a testament to how well he could blend into ordinary life, despite the horrors he was hiding. By the early 1980s, Ridgway's urges had grown uncontrollable. In the spring of 1982, Ridgway began cruising along the Pacific Highway in Seattle, a well-known area frequented by sex workers and vulnerable women. These women, often runaways or those struggling with addiction, were easy prey for Ridgway. He approached them in his truck, offering rides, money, or drugs. He would act friendly and calm, making them feel safe before luring them to secluded areas. His first confirmed victim was 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield, whose body was discovered in the Green River on July 15, 1982. Wendy's body had been strangled and dumped in the river, a hallmark of what would become Ridgway's signature. Her murder marked the beginning of one of the longest and deadliest killing sprees in U.S. history. Ridgway's method of killing was brutal but efficient. After luring his victims into his truck, he would drive them to remote locations, sometimes secluded wooded areas or desolate patches of highway. He would engage in sexual activity with them before suddenly attacking, often strangling them with his bare hands or using a ligature. Ridgway would later confess that he preferred strangulation because it gave him a sense of power and control, allowing him to watch the life drain from his victims. He would dispose of the bodies near rivers, especially the Green River, which led the police to dub him the Green River Killer. The murders were initially discovered when police found several bodies dumped in or near the Green River in rapid succession. Wendy Caulfield was just the first in a growing list of missing and murdered women. Ridgway killed with such frequency that the authorities struggled to keep up. In less than 6 months, 5 more bodies had been discovered near the river, each victim showing signs of having been strangled and left in the same disturbing manner. Fear spread rapidly through the Seattle area, especially among sex workers and young women living on the streets. Women began disappearing at an alarming rate, with their remains often discovered weeks or months later, sometimes in advanced stages of decomposition. Ridgway would frequently revisit the bodies of his victims, engaging in acts of necrophilia long after their deaths. This morbid behavior added another layer of horror to his crimes and revealed his deep-seated pathology. The authorities were overwhelmed by the scale of the murders and the lack of concrete leads. A massive investigation was launched to find the Green River Killer, with detectives working tirelessly to stop the carnage. However, Ridgway's ability to blend into society as a mild-mannered, ordinary man made him an elusive target. He maintained a stable job as a truck painter, lived in a modest house, and had a family. His outward appearance gave no indication of the monstrous double life he was leading. In 1983, the Green River Task Force was formed to investigate the growing number of murders. Despite their efforts, leads remained scarce. Ridgway's methods were methodical and well-rehearsed. He often chose desolate locations where he could dispose of his victims without being seen. He would leave the bodies scattered across multiple sites, ensuring that no single location could provide investigators with clear evidence. The police were baffled, and as the body count rose, the Green River Killer became a name synonymous with terror. In 1987, Gary Ridgway was interviewed by the police after being identified as a potential suspect. He had been seen in the areas where the victims disappeared, and his name had come up in connection with several of the women. However, Ridgway was a master of deception. During his interview, he maintained a calm and cooperative demeanor, offering plausible explanations for his whereabouts. He even passed a lie detector test, which further threw the investigators off his trail. Despite their suspicions, they lacked the evidence needed to arrest him, and Ridgway was free to continue his killing spree. By the late 1990s, advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA technology, provided investigators with new tools to revisit the cold cases of the Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway had managed to evade capture for years, but his time was running out. The Green River Task Force, which had been relentlessly pursuing the killer for over a decade, had collected crucial evidence from the crime scenes, including samples of bodily fluids left on the victims. For years, these samples had yielded no useful results, but with the advent of more sensitive DNA testing, the evidence that had once been inconclusive was now about to provide a breakthrough. In 2001, detectives re-examined several key pieces of evidence from the early 1980s murders. They sent the DNA samples for new testing, and the results were chillingly clear. The DNA from 3 of the victims, Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, and Carol Christensen, matched Gary Ridgway's profile. After nearly 2 decades, the authorities had finally found their Green River Killer. It was a moment of both triumph and horror for law enforcement. Triumph in that they had their killer, but horror in realizing how long Ridgway had been able to slip through the cracks of the system. On November 30th, 2001, Ridgway was arrested outside his workplace, a truck painting company in Auburn, Washington, where he had worked for over 30 years. The arrest was swift and uneventful. Ridgway, now in his early 50s, showed little emotion as officers led him away in handcuffs. He remained calm, as though he had been expecting this moment for years. His demeanor was chillingly ordinary for someone who had been responsible for such a brutal and extended killing spree. At first, Ridgway denied the murders, maintaining his composure during hours of interrogation. However, as the evidence mounted, including the irrefutable DNA match, Ridgway's facade began to crack. In exchange for his full cooperation, Ridgway was spared the death penalty. Part of his agreement with the authorities involved leading them to the remains of additional victims whose bodies had not yet been discovered. Over the course of several months, Ridgway accompanied investigators to various locations in the dense forests and remote areas around Seattle and Tacoma, where he had disposed of many of his victims. Some of the remains were so deeply hidden that they had been missed in earlier searches. Ridgway's willingness to cooperate provided much-needed closure to some of the families of the missing women, though many more families were left without answers. The public was horrified as the details of Ridgway's crimes came to light. For nearly 2 decades, he had terrorized the Seattle-Tacoma area, killing dozens of women while leading a seemingly normal life. Ridgway had been married multiple times and had held down the same job for over 30 years. He was the epitome of an unremarkable middle-aged man, someone who could easily blend into the background. His ability to compartmentalize his double life, keeping his monstrous urges hidden from his family and co-workers, shocked the nation. As part of his sentencing, Ridgway faced the families of his victims in court. One by one, the family members of the women he had murdered stepped forward to deliver impact statements, expressing their grief, anger, and devastation. Some spoke of the pain of not knowing what had happened to their loved ones for years, while others described the unimaginable trauma of learning the truth about their deaths. Many of them directed their anger and heartbreak at Ridgway, hoping to see some sign of remorse. But throughout the proceedings, Ridgway remained cold and emotionless, showing no reaction as the families poured out their pain. One moment in the courtroom, however, would stand out in stark contrast to the anger and grief. A father of one of Ridgway's victims addressed the killer directly, telling him that he forgave him. "You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe," the father said. "And that is what God says to do, and that's to forgive." For the first time during the trial, Ridgway broke down in tears. The sight of the man who had killed so many, finally showing emotion in response to an act of forgiveness, left a profound impact on those in the courtroom. On December 18, 2003, Gary Ridgway was sentenced to 48 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His sentencing marked the end of one of the most extensive and complex murder investigations in U.S. history. The Green River Killer had finally been brought to justice, but for the families of his victims, the scars left by his actions would never fully heal. Gary Ridgway's ability to lead a double life as both a family man and a serial killer is a chilling reminder that evil can hide in plain sight. For nearly 2 decades, he preyed on vulnerable women, committing acts of unimaginable cruelty. His capture brought a measure of justice, but the pain and suffering he inflicted will be felt for generations. As we close this chapter, we reflect on the horrors of the Green River Killer's reign and the lessons it leaves behind. Thank you for joining us. Stay vigilant and stay safe. Please like and subscribe to Evil Exposed for more riveting stories.